Hey, this is Elihu, and this is part two of how do I price Major League Baseball team totals with this big pile of data we have. Now, if you watched the last video, you hopefully have about 30,000 lines of data, lots of baseball games for the last 11 years in a clean, usable format. Now, the question is, how do you turn all this data into a number where you can compare it to the market and actually bet? And I can tell you probably the worst way to do it is with a regression. There are two problems with the regression approach to this. The first is that for anytime you're betting a spread or a total, you're trying to predict a median and not a mean. So you don't care how much over it goes the team total, as long as it goes over or under. And most regressions are going to use some kind of x squared weighting, where it weights the outliers a lot more than the ones that are close when it's trying to get the average. Now, there are some regression techniques that don't do that, but if you use a standard regression for a median type betting, you're already at a disadvantage. The second challenge you have with using regressions is it doesn't give you a nice number. It doesn't give you over 3 minus 120. It gives you 3.2, and you have to find a way to convert 3.2 into 3 over whatever price it is. Now, you can do that, and it's attainable, but it's just an extra step. So instead, we're going to use a different approach, and this is an approach I've used for all kinds of props and derivatives, and I call that sample-based pricing. We have a sample currently, our whole data set is, maybe 20,000 games. We want to pick out games that are very similar to the one we're looking at betting. So let's say we're looking at a game, you have a road favorite, minus 137, take back 127, total of 8 over minus 114, plus 101 on the under. I got those numbers from Pinnacle on a game I'm going to show you later. When we're pricing the team totals, we want to find games that are very similar to that. So the implied win rate, if you have a minus 137, take back 127, you'd expect the home team to win about 43% of the time, 43.2. So we want to build a sample that has the home team winning about 43.2% of the games. And if we have a total of 8, we want, 114 over plus 101 on the under. We want it to go over 8 about 48.3% of the time. But you got to do both those things at the same time. Now, if you're doing a search, and you put in a search parameter, and instead of getting 43.2, you get 44%. And instead of getting over 8, 48.3, you get over 8, 51%. You just added a ton of noise. And this happens all the time when people do sampling. So a key concept is when you're sampling and you're trying to build a sample for a game, you need to look at the medians, the median total and the effective win rate of the home team, and make sure that whatever sample you're building is close to the one that you're betting. And the reason is we believe in efficient markets. If a minus 200 favorite, let's just say the no vig price is minus 200 and you'd expect it to win 2/3 of the time, and you're looking at the past and it's only won 64% of the time, that mistake is going to get fixed going forward. You can't count on that. So even in that one set of games looked good in the past, you need to fix that by adjusting your sample so that if you believe it's, if your sample price is 66.7%, then your sample had better be pretty close to 66.7%. So with that, we're going to build a new and improved, more powerful spreadsheet. And there are several steps to doing this. The first thing you're going to do is put in your search terms. What is it that I want my sample to look like? Then you're going to put in an if statement for each data point. You want each data point to compare how its game played out versus your sample. Then you're going to build a summary of your sample to make sure that whatever it is you're building as your sample really matches what it is you're trying to predict. So again, if I have a minus 150 no vig favorite game, my sample had better be pretty close to 60%. Once you've built your sample, then you have to price whatever props it is you're trying to price. And in this one, we're going to price visitor and home team totals. Now, this sample wouldn't be good enough to price run lines, and that's because we don't have it broken down between AL and NL. And the push rate of the one changes a lot based on if you're in the NL or the AL. I also wouldn't use it for first half betting, or first 5 inning betting, because that relies a lot on pitching. Because you can have the same price and the same total, but different splits in the runs based on how good the starter is versus the bullpen. But for team totals, this data is really good. So without that, with no further ado, we're going to move on to the next part. Here's a spreadsheet I built where we can actually price pretty much any team total. At the top here, we have a description of the match we're trying to price. So we have the money line for the game, we have the total, and with this, we have a conversion. So the money line turns into an implied home win rate and an implied over rate for whatever total you're betting. Now, a formula you're going to use over and over when you're pricing things with spreadsheets is converting a money line into an implied win percentage. And then when you have two money lines, converting those into a single no vig win percentage. The formula for money line to win percentage is pretty straightforward. One way you can improve your money line percentage, taking the vig out a little bit better, is instead of splitting it 50-50, is to take out more of the vig depending on how big the favorite is. So, for example, minus 137 plus 127, the midpoint would be minus 132 plus 132, but we're going to assume that the fair price is closer to the dog. So we assign more of the vigorish to the favorite and less to the dog. Once you have your description of it, we now have our search terms. These are the what we're going to use to pick samples out, to try to find the perfect set to where we can price things. So for every game, we're going to convert its money lines into a win percentage, and this gives us a range that we're going to search. For every total, we have the actual total and the over win percentage. So for our total base, we're going to use all games in our sample with a total of 8, and I'm going to look 7.5 and 8.5 with the option to exclude some of those games so I get the right median. So for every data point, we convert the visitor and the favorite into win percentages. We use that to convert the home win percentage, and we do the same thing for the game total, the closing total, and the total over. And then we use two if statements to say whether or not this data point should go into our sample. This first one is an extra if I put in there so that I can trim some of the totals on to make my total a little bit higher or a little bit lower. And the second one is to make sure that our implied win rate is in the range it should be and the total is in the range it should be. And if both of these are true, then I'm going to look at whether or not the home team won, total runs scored, visitor, and home, and we're going to use that for statistical analysis later. So it's very important, again, to make sure that we have the right implied win rate. So in this sample we picked out 1,000 games, 1,098 games, and the sample win rate here is the number in red is the actual win rate of our sample. You just take the average. You have a 1 or a 0 if the home team wins, and that's just simply the average. And I compare that to my implied win rate based on the price. So 42.8, 43.2, I'm off at 0.5%. That's pretty close. And the total, over 8, 48.5% versus 48.3, that's pretty good too. Now we can play with these numbers to try to get it closer. Let's say I wanted to increase my sample win percentage. I might exclude 40, implied win rates of 40, go up to 41, and now I just overshot. So, but that's just about as good. And you can do the same thing with totals. So here I'm going to increase how many totals I accept on the high end, and that didn't do anything. But if I add a bunch of them, then my implied win rate goes up. So once you have your sample, we have our data points, which are visitor runs and home runs. And in our sample, this is a really simple way to count. We just look at our runs scored in our sample, what's the median, and then we count how many went over and divide it by the sample minus those that pushed. and then we do two alternate run lines. Sorry, two alternate team totals with the same idea. We're just counting how many times does it go over, how many times does it go under, and remove the pushes. And we do the same thing for the home team also. So I'm going to actually look at a game I was pricing to do this one. And we have San Francisco, Texas. San Francisco is a minus 137 favorite. So I built a sample around this game. And if we look, do we have a bet? So we can bet 3.5. So the home team, 3.5 under 120. And they make the fair price minus 108. So that's pretty close to a bet. In fact, I'd probably bet that. And then 4.5, we have under 121 versus 115. It's a small edge. I'd probably pass on that. And what you're going to find is when you look at these team totals, you're probably going to bet the under more frequently than the under. At least, from my experience. Now this is a lot of work because you have to do this for every single game. You have to, play with your samples, and sometimes it can take a minute for every one of these that you want to price. So generally when you do this, you're going to want to have more data points in your sample so that you can price more than just one set of props. You may want to do, score in the first inning, any other prop you can think of, put it in there, and then when you price it, you'll have all these and you can view them all. Now another thing you may want to do if you have some programming skills is you may want to automate the generation of the samples to try different numbers until you get a sample that meets whatever criteria. But this is a real tool. This is worth money. Sports books, for the most part, don't use things quite like this. They use obsolete lookup charts. And if you do this kind of work, you're probably going to beat team totals. So if you have any questions, post up on the RAS Slack, and we'll see where we can go from there.